Well, hello, and welcome to another podcast. This is number 20, and it's about the United States in 1800 and the 1812 War. My mother came from a family of 13 children. Imagine how many aunts and uncles and cousins I have. The oldest grandchild was 48 when I was born because I was one of the youngest grandchildren. This remarkable family lived in Bennington, Idaho, on a ranch in the late 1800s. They were self sustaining because they all worked for the good of the family. They were each other's best friends. They all had different talents and personalities, but they learned to coexist peacefully. As they all married and started families, they would keep in touch with each other. And the cousins grew up loving all their aunts and uncles and their cousins. If disaster struck in one of their lives, they all rallied around to help, such as when the 12th child was born and the baby died. They laughed and cried together. Family reunions in Georgetown Canyon were favorite vacation times for me. Every first weekend in August was planned for a family reunion. They organized themselves with representatives from each of the 13 families. Really, it was only 12 because one baby had died. And they organized themselves for a calling tree and a representative for family records and a treasurer and an elected reunion president and vice president taking turns from the original 12 siblings. They even had a family flag that they flew at reunions. They were organized and they managed to help each other emotionally, spiritually, financially, and paid for Grandma's care until she died at age 96. My grandfather was born in 1866 and died in 1917 when my mother was 10. Because it was a strong family unit, they came together even more united. A parallelism between these 13 children and 13 states came to my mind. Organizing themselves into a stronger, united unit, sharing responsibilities, having representatives, and flying a flag. It works with effort and a vision of the future. The United States was young when they started adding a few more amendments to the Constitution. Understanding its growth and problems helps us see why there needed to be more changes and amendments. This new country had a population of 5.3 million by the year 1800. During the next 60 years, they would grow to 75 million. That's 70 million people migrating to the United States in 60 years. The capital city moved from Philadelphia, where the um, Continental Congress had always met, and where Liberty Bell was, and they moved to Washington D.C. and they built the White House there. George Washington had already served 2 terms as president. John Adams had been president, and now it was Thomas Jefferson in the early 1800s. All exceptional leaders, and things started to really change when Thomas Jefferson was president, though. Land acquisitions of the Louisiana Purchase from France doubled the size of the United States, and people started thinking of moving west and spreading out. So at this time, 80% of the early 1800 population were farmers. 80% were farmers. Immigration was massive. Wow, ICE would have had a handful back then. You all should know something about the Louisiana Purchase already, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But do you know about the Rupert Land Trouble? Rupert, Ruper, Rupert Land. The only Rupert Land I have ever known is on my way to Salt Lake City from Boise, I traveled through Rupert, Idaho. That's the only one. I looked it up, and it's not named after the same person. So, This Rupert land was owned by Prince Rupert of Prince Rupert of the Rhine. And this is a picture of him. I'm going to try to hold him so you can see him somewhat. Hopefully you can. It's not a very good picture, but you can see the aristocratic clothing, hairstyle, and expression on his face. Rather a snob, you know, and he lived the life of a prince. This man was born to King Frederick V, who fled for his life when the Roman Empire conquered Prague, which is now Germany. And baby Rupert was almost left behind, but a servant threw him in the fleeing carriage just in time. His mother was the sister to the King of England, Charles I, the king that created the Church of England and overtaxed the people and dismissed Parliament and was not liked. Yeah, that king. At age 14, Rupert became a soldier and was fearless in battle. He went to England and he was appointed a general by his uncle, and he recruited 3,000 men and won several battles for England. He served many years in the British Navy. He even tried his hand at being a pirate. As he got older, he spent time as a scientist because he had been well educated. He was credited with early versions of creating the early versions of a machine gun, a revolver, and a torpedo. He was an artist and invented some photography plates. He also became involved in the colonization of North America. This is where he fits in with what we're going to talk about. He dealt with fur and slave trade. Made a lot of money doing that back then. He was made the first governor of Rupert Land in Canada, even though he never set foot there. He was one of the owners of the Hudson Bay Fur and Trade Company, and they were given a massive piece of land in Canada and the upper part of the United States. And so I wanted to have you take a look at the map of the land during this time. So I'm going to hold this up and hopefully I can see it and point to where I need to be. If you can see that, let me put on my glasses so I can see too. All right, let's get this back in focus. I can't see the map and this at the same time. This is not working real well. Okay, here are this is the eastern coast. These are the 13 colonies in pink. The gray area is owned by Spain, except for this northern corner. It's not claimed territory yet. But this is owned by Spain. Oh, and this was owned by France, but it was the Louisiana Purchase. So we now have that big piece of land. And this land down here by Florida and above it and coming across this gray, that was Spanish, owned by Spain. And this red piece right here was a piece of land we were fighting for with the Spaniards, and there was always a squabble going on down there in this red piece of land above Florida. Then there's this land up here in the red. Well, let's let it come back here. Come on, come back. In the red. And that land is Rupert Land. And this part right here is Rupert Land. And this was disputed whether it was going to be part of Maine or part of Canada. And this part was disputed as well, right here. So this is what the land looked like in the early 1800s. And down here we have Alaska owned by Russia already. So up here is what we're going to talk about, these lands up here. And the we're going to talk about it in a minute, but the border was established, and at that time, at the end of the 1812 war, this land right here was given to United States, and this land, and um, and this land, but this land up here we gave to Canada, and and we came to an agreement and established a border. So that's what the land looked like, and this land was Rupert land, and it went up into a big track up in Canada. Up through here it was all Rupert land. I had somehow missed that in my past studies of U.S. history. Rupert land was a new term for me. The American Navy was very small, but we had made a lot of smaller merchant vessels that made good time to Europe and Middle East and Far East, and they were cutting into the British profits. And the British kept on seizing these ships. Matter of fact, they had taken 400 American ships within a 2-year period of time. And they also took 6,000 to 9,000 American crew sailors who were manning those ships, and they took them to man British ships that were terribly understaffed. They used the excuse that they were all rebellious British subjects, showing complete disregard to the Revolutionary War Treaty. With only 16 warships, and the U.S. couldn't directly challenge the 500 warships that the Royal Navy had, so Thomas Jefferson and Congress came up with a plan. They decided to target Canada and Rupert land. And they were both owned by British, and if they could get control of that land, they could use it for a bargaining chip to get their sailors back. So already they were thinking of giving a concession of that land back to England, just so they could get their ships and their men back from British control. America figured it was a matter of just marching up there and taking over. After all, the United States population right then at 1812 was 7.7 million, and up north the population was only 500,000. So they were really thought that Canada would welcome the liberators, and it sounded like it was good in theory, but that wasn't the case. The War of 1812 started with America being the aggressors. They marched up to Canada and to Rupert land and attacked at 3 different places at the same time. And they lost every one of those battles. They didn't count on the Canadians and Rupert land soliciting the help of the Indians up there to fight them back. And the people living in Canada were very loyal to the Crown, and they didn't want to be liberated. So, in 1813, it went a little bit better for us. In the western part in Rupert land and Lake Erie, we were able to gain some territory there. By 1814, England had won their war with France, so France was no longer helping the colonies with money or soldiers, and the British had taken Washington and had burned the federal buildings, and they had tried to take Camp Henry, but Camp Henry stood its ground, and that's when the national anthem was written by Francis Scott Key. A peace treaty in Belgium was signed in 1814, and the Americans had won on the sea with their smaller, faster ships that they had put 22-inch thick iron plates in the hull, the front part of the to protect them in battle, and it did. And the ships were called Old Ironside. And the British had won on the land, and they had been able to save Canada. So, the biggies from the War of 1812 was we won respect at being acknowledged as a country, and the northern borders were established, and this was the last standoff with Britain. In our home in Utah, the kitchen and dining room were connected. The kitchen counter wrapped around from the refrigerator on the north wall and created an island on the south side of the kitchen. This left a small strip of linoleum with the width of the counter between the kitchen and the dining room. I called it the Gaza Strip. Each child was assigned a chore to do every Saturday morning. One was to clean, sweep, and mop the dining room, and the other was to do the same for the kitchen. Thus you can see how that strip was not claimed by either cleaner, and it became the dirtiest spot in the house. Negotiating territory boundaries are important to countries and families. We had to learn to do that in order to get that floor mopped in between the kitchen and the dining room. Meanwhile, the infrastructure of the United States was creating wider roads, and the Fulton steamboat was hauling cargo faster up and down the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, making good time, and commerce was going well. I'm going to show you a picture of that boat. If you can see it there, you can see sail ships. You can see the puff of smoke coming up from the steam from the fire burning in the engine of that steamboat. You can see the paddles off to the side just paddling away, much faster, more efficient than the men who were trying to row boats or sailboats and catching their wind with their sails. This was it had a flag, United States flag on it, and it was faster, and it was the beginning of them thinking of steam energy and different energy to make things move and to work. Next would come the railroad. But this is where it all starts, is with the Fulton steamboat. Now, the southern states at the same time were becoming more agricultural and with their cotton crops and tobacco crops, and the north was becoming more industrial with businesses and doing assembly line work and lots of shops. Eastern cities were busting at the seams, and the west was being mapped. Lewis and Clark had made their fact-finding adventure, and the only really bad thing that was going on this time was the displacement and lack of respect showed to the American Indians. The only amendment that took place in the early 1800s was in 1804 about the voting process of the president and vice president, electoral votes, and the transportation of those votes, and the reading of those votes in Congress so all the votes were accounted for and a new presidency was elected. The next time an amendment was declared was 64 years later in 1868, and it was the abolishment of slavery. That's about the whole of other podcasts that we need to do with a twist on it next time. May God be with you till we meet again.